Where it begins for me is this recognition that perfectionism is a ready-made label for some of the difficulties that are encountered in higher education, in academia. And it's a ready-made label that comes with some standard responses or advice offered to those who are diagnosed as experiencing perfectionism or suffering from perfectionism. There is one voice associated with perfectionism that is concerned about making mistakes or about feeling exposed.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of sound advice is out there about how to address those concerns. But there's the other voice of perfectionism, which is about ambition, about creativity, curiosity, about wanting to make meaning. And I think the kinds of anxiety that arise with that voice are different and need to be addressed differently. Some of the strategies then associated with addressing that first voice and its anxieties, when applied to the second voice, ends up hampering our creativity and deepening the paralysis.
When we hold our own experience of creating work alongside what do the norms of our institution or of our academic field seem to ask of us, something interesting happens there too. My relationship to those norms is not the same as my relationship to my work per se. And I feel that sometimes the discussion about perfectionism becomes too tightly coupled to what is it that is sufficient for meeting those norms, whereas it may be sufficient for meeting those norms, but it's not nourishing me in relation to how do I find satisfaction and fulfillment in my work. And that doesn't mean that my standards are always higher than, what they need to be. But it does mean that using the kind of norms as what is enough and what is fast enough, what is good enough, and organizing the work in relation to those misses out on what actually is the engine, the creative engine behind what I do.
So much of the advice around being perfectionist is to lower your expectations, is to move from a perfectionist mode into a production mode, is to welcome critique and not fuss over smaller details. I find that if we allow some room for the other voice of perfectionism to arise, we hear a different brand of anxiety that's not about making mistakes or wanting to avoid errors or fearing exposure. It's about creating meaning and the risks associated with creating meaning, finding an audience, knowing when your ideas, your concepts have application and resonance. And what happens when we allow for ourselves to hear those anxieties is that we begin to, create room for those meaning-making impulses alongside the institutional norms to explore what are the spaces within the institutions that will be nurturing of the desire to make meaning, and what are the resources which could honor and support the anxieties associated with meaning making. Those require our creativity to look for. They may be present in hidden spaces, in unexpected connections with colleagues from different disciplines. And I think allowing ourselves to listen to the different voices of our perfectionism then allows us to reach out for those resources which are out there, but not in the obvious institutional ways.